Hello and welcome to this edition of World War. My name is Mohammed Saleh. According to Article 101 of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, piracy at high seas refers to illegal acts of violence, detention or depredation committed for private ends by crew or passengers of a private ship or aircraft against another ship or aircraft in international waters. With the definition of piracy being so clear, Donald Trump has made a candid confession. The American Navy's seizure of the Iranian oil, he said, is akin to what pirates do. So while Donald Trump has gotten himself bogged down more and more at the Strait of Hormuz, America's long-cherished military alliance, the NATO, is slowly being unmade. On the 27th of April, the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz stated that the Iranians were humiliating the Americans in talks to end the 2-month-old war. Immediately, the Pentagon announced that the United States is withdrawing 5,000 of its troops from Germany. The drawdown will happen over a span of 6 to 12 months, but the message is not lost on anyone. The Iran war is remaking the global world order, and one of the very first casualties appears to be the ironclad NATO military alliance, which, at least from the American perspective, is no longer an alliance that is willing to dig America out of a tough spot in a time of its need. Our next report tells you more.
We call it an iron wall. It's essentially an iron wall. We have such great military and great Navy. And they were going straight through. And they said, turn your ship around. And there was no response. Turn your ship around. Evacuate your engine room immediately. And you see all these guys running out of there. Now, they're 5 miles away. And one shot into the engine room, blew up the engine room. The ship stopped. They used tugboats, and then we landed on top of it. On top of everything else, we then land on top of it, and we took over the ship. We took over the cargo, took over the oil. It's a very profitable business. Who would have thought we were doing that? We're like pirates.
An American president cannot get more candid than this. We're sort of like pirates, admitted the American president, as he applies pressure on Tehran in a contest of blockades which tests who will blink first at Hormuz. While Trump talks of negotiations, he's also quietly building up more military presence in the region. And although the United States can claim that it has won tactically, Iran, by wresting control of the Strait of Hormuz, appears to have seized the strategic advantage. So as the war has hit a stalemate and the US Navy's inability to open the Strait of Hormuz militarily has become more evident by the day, Friedrich Merz has made a stark assessment of what really has been achieved by the Americans in the Iran war.
The Americans clearly have no strategy, and the problem with conflicts like this is always that you don't just have to go in, you also have to get out again. We saw that all too painfully in Afghanistan for 20 years. We saw it in Iraq. So this whole affair is, as I said, ill-considered, to say the least. At the moment, I cannot see what strategic exit the Americans are now opting for, especially as the Iranians are obviously negotiating very skillfully, or rather, very skillfully not negotiating and letting the Americans travel to Islamabad only to leave again without any results. An entire nation is being humiliated by the Iranian state leadership, especially by these so-called revolutionary guards.
This assessment has incensed Donald Trump. All along, Trump and the leadership of his military establishment had been patting each other's backs on how wonderfully the Iran war was being executed.
Air campaign that we've conducted, that Israel's conducted alongside us, was one for the history books, truly. And it's because we have a president of the United States that when he sends his warfighters out to fight, he unties their hands to actually go out and close with and destroy the enemy as viciously as possible from moment one. And that's why we see ourselves as part of this negotiation as well. We negotiate with bombs.
But Friedrich Merz has said the quiet part out loud. Americans in their Iran war lack strategy and therefore are being humiliated by Iran.
And you would have thought they would have said, we would love to help you. But they didn't, which I think was a verse. And Germany, I mean, he's doing a terrible job. He's got immigration problems. He's got energy problems. He's got problems of all kinds. And he's got a big problem with Ukraine because they're in that mess. And he criticized me for doing the whole thing with Iran.
The NATO military alliance was brought into existence in 1949. Its objective was to keep the nations of Western Europe safe and away from the influence of the Soviet Union. But the way things are unfolding, the NATO military alliance may unravel in the waters of the Strait of Hormuz. For the first time, perhaps since the end of the Second World War, the United States is fighting an adversary which, though not as technologically advanced or with a similar firepower as the United States, has been able to hit back at American military power in ways the American military establishment was not able to predict. Iranian drones, especially the Shahed 136 drones, have exposed the flawed economics behind the American doctrine of fighting wars. Iranian hypersonic missiles have pierced through the tightly constructed air defense shields that had given the illusion of invulnerability to US military bases in the Gulf nations and to Israel. But Trump's closest allies in Europe, who had lived under the umbrella of US security as part of the NATO military alliance, have now become more vocal in pointing out to the American president as to how the Iran war is not an issue for which the European powers will get involved. And the NATO military alliance that was forged in the waters of the North Atlantic may end up sinking at the bottom of the Strait of Hormuz. Ukraine this week struck Russian oil storage, ports and refineries, bombing targets as far away as the Urals, that is 1,600 kilometers from its borders. The Ukrainian Security Service, the SBU, confirmed that it had struck Russia's Transneft oil pumping and distribution facility in the city of Perm, from where oil is pumped to the Perm refinery and via pipelines is sent in all four directions across Russia. Volodymyr Zelensky has announced that this is the beginning of a new stage in the use of Ukrainian weapons to limit the potential of Russia's war. Ukraine's strikes are said to be a part of a strategy to deprive Russia of the windfall profits from soaring oil prices due to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. But how successful has this strategy been? And how long can Ukraine sustain it? Our next report tells you more.
Kyiv's attacks have been steadily increasing in range, volume and intensity, with outsized impact on Russian oil exports. On the 23rd of April, Ukraine damaged 3 storage tanks at the Gorky oil pumping station in Nizhny Novgorod and struck the petrochemical plant in Samara. The next day, it destroyed 2 production facilities at the Atlant Aero factory in Taganrog, Rostov, which build the Molniya drones that Russia has unleashed on Ukraine to great effect. This week, Ukraine also struck the Yaroslavl oil refinery, and on Tuesday, it bombed Russia's Tuapse oil refinery on the Black Sea for the 3rd time in April. So far, at least 24 oil storage tanks at the Tuapse refinery have been destroyed. During the Chernobyl anniversary on the 26th of April, marking 40 years since the disaster, Zelensky lashed out at Russia.
In 2022, the Russians came to Chernobyl, occupied our station, turned it into a springboard for their war, and demonstrated that they did not draw any conclusions at all and did not understand anything from the Soviet mistakes. They are people without memory and without conscience. That is why all of us, all of Russia's neighbors, all Europeans should be as united as possible, act in a coordinated manner, understanding our interests, which are common: security, economic, energy, and all others.
Russia too has been unrelenting in its attacks. Almost 410 drones were launched at Ukraine in a daytime attack that injured 10 people in the western city of Ternopil. The Ukrainian Air Force claimed to have downed or neutralized about 388 of the drones in the north, south, center and west of the country. In central Ukraine, 19 drones were downed over the Cherkasy region. According to reports, a nursery, a school, 7 private houses and a power line were destroyed. A woman was hurt in the central Vinnytsia region. A building was destroyed near the southern city of Odessa, which had come under the overnight attack, while another daytime attack damaged the roof of a shopping center and caused a fire in Odessa. Dmitry Medvedev has accused Europe of militarizing at a rate similar to what it did before the Second World War.
We know what was happening in Europe in the 1930s. Intensive militarization was going on, above all in Germany by the German fascists. But naturally, people were getting ready for a war in other places too. Economy was getting militarized and a large amount of equipment was being produced. Same things are happening now. What are the Europeans saying? That the war with Russia is inevitable. I do not know where they got it from, but this is a mantra. This is being said every day.
In fact, he went as far as to say that the United States may not be the most suitable mediator for the Ukraine war.
It's hardly fair to assume that a country that steals presidents and starts conflicts like this can act as an effective mediator in all situations. I stopped 9 or 10 wars. Well, we all know what that means, the words of a famous politician today. The problem is that almost all of these conflicts have resumed. But I can't deny something else. At the very least, the current U.S. administration, Donald Trump's administration, is trying to do something about it. Just remember the previous Democratic Biden administration. It simply harnessed the wheel of war, or the team of war, and financed the conflict to the fullest extent possible.
At the moment, Russia has floated the idea of a ceasefire during the occasion of its Military Day parade. But there is little talk of any permanent ceasefire in a war that is now grinding on in its 5th year.
On the 30th of April, 17 people, including 5 women and 2 children, were killed in Israeli bombings over southern Lebanon. Exactly a week ago from the calamitous day, the American President Donald Trump had announced a 3-week extension of the ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel, further hinting at a possible breakthrough towards lasting peace in Lebanon. Which brings us to the all-important question: is the tenuous truce between Israel and Lebanon just a name? Well, the truce has largely halted strikes in the capital Beirut and its southern suburbs. The Israeli bombings at the pretext of targeting Hezbollah infrastructure have persisted elsewhere in the south, with continued air raids and repeated evacuation orders. Our next report tells you more.
On the 2nd of March, 3 days into the US-Israeli war on Iran, the Lebanese militant and political group Hezbollah fired rockets at Israel in retaliation for the killing of Iran's then supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. It was the latest escalation in fighting in the decades-long conflict between Hezbollah and Israel. A 10-day ceasefire was announced on the 16th of April after the first direct talks between Lebanese and Israeli ambassadors in Washington in decades. In the subsequent days, both Hezbollah and Israel accused each other of violating the ceasefire agreement. Amid such trust deficit, on the 23rd of April, the US President Donald Trump announced a 3-week extension of the ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel, giving rise to the possibility of a lasting peace in Lebanon. But the Israeli war machine has continued its march in southern Lebanon, ostensibly claiming that its actions are in response to what it describes as violations of the deal by Hezbollah. On Tuesday, Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar insisted that Israel was not seeking to seize territory in Lebanon.
Israel has no territorial ambitions in Lebanon. Our presence in the areas by our northern border serves one purpose: protecting our citizens.
A couple of days later, at least 17 people, including 5 women and 2 children, were killed in Israeli strikes in southern Lebanon despite a ceasefire now in its third week. In addition to the 17 people killed, at least 35 others, including 9 children and 8 women, were wounded in Israeli assaults. According to the Lebanese Health Ministry, since this latest round of hostilities erupted on the 2nd of March, more than 2,500 people have been killed in Lebanon, including 103 health professionals. More than 120 Israeli attacks have been recorded on ambulances and medical facilities.
There is fear everywhere. It is not safe for him or for the other young men. It is not safe for the paramedics, for the people, for the civilians, and the young men. We fear for all of them because Israel harmed everyone. It doesn't differentiate between paramedic, civilian, fighter, or army.
Our role is to stand with our people. Our role is to take action fast to save souls and those injured and rescue the martyrs from under the rubble. The international humanitarian law gives us the right and protection, whether for us or the rest of the paramedics teams. We will continue performing our role despite the risks and the difficulties.
Since early March, the number of Israeli troops that have been killed by Hezbollah's attacks stands at 17. On Thursday, Hezbollah said it had carried out attacks on Israeli forces in the south, including a drone strike targeting soldiers in the Bint Jbeil district. It is to be noted that since the eruption of war between Israel and Hezbollah on the 2nd of March, Israel has widened a ground invasion into Lebanon's south, ordering hundreds of thousands of Lebanese to flee villages it views as Hezbollah strongholds. On Thursday, the Israeli military issued evacuation warnings for 15 villages in southern Lebanon, many of which were outside what Israel has designated as the Yellow Line. Lebanese President Joseph Aoun, criticizing continuing Israeli violations of the truce, has said, and I quote, "Pressure must be exerted on Israel to ensure it respects international laws and conventions and ceases targeting civilians, paramedics, civil defense and humanitarian organizations." Unquote. But it will be easier said than done, considering Israel's belligerence, decades of hostilities between the two countries, Hezbollah's continued presence, and long-standing disagreements over the country's shared land border.
The Republic of Mali is besieged with its gravest security crisis since 2012. Several days of fierce fighting beginning early on the 25th of April between the army and the jihadists allied with the Tuaregs have raised some serious questions about the future of the military junta running the West African nation. The strategic northern town of Kidal has been recaptured by the Tuareg separatists, and the jihadists boasted on Thursday of having captured the military base of Hombori in central Mali and taken control of 2 checkpoints near the Malian capital of Bamako. The capital city that is home to more than 3 million people is under a partial blockade by the Islamist militants barely days after the country's defense minister, Sadio Kamara, was assassinated there. The fighters from the Al-Qaeda-linked group Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wal-Muslimin have issued a warning that no one will be allowed to enter into the capital anymore. Our next report tells you more.
Early on the 25th of April, the Al-Qaeda-linked jihadists as well as the separatist Tuareg rebels launched the largest assault in the Republic of Mali in nearly 15 years, attacking the military, junta and its Russian paramilitary backers. The nationwide coordinated Saturday dawn attacks against strategic junta positions, including areas around the capital, Bamako, killed at least 23 people, with the death toll expected to rise. During the attacks, 47-year-old Defense Minister Sadio Kamara, largely seen as the mastermind behind the junta's pivot to Russia, was killed in an apparent suicide truck, bombing on his residence near Bamako.
The transitional government of Mali deeply regrets to inform the public of the tragic death of Lieutenant General Sadio Kamara, Minister of State, Minister of Defense, and Veterans Affairs. This occurred following cowardly terrorist attacks on the morning of April 25, 2026.
Dans la matinée du 25 avril 2026, un véhicule piégé.
A car bomb driven by a suicide bomber targeted the minister's residence. He engaged in a firefight with the attackers and managed to neutralize some of them. During the intense clashes, he was wounded and transported to the hospital, where he unfortunately succumbed to his injuries.
Il a été blessé.
The Tuareg-dominated separatist Azawad Liberation Front and jihadists were able to capture the key northern town of Kidal, but the Malian army fought back Wednesday, waging a series of airstrikes. Additionally, the rebels and jihadists had also targeted Timbuktu, Gao in the mostly desert north, along with Mopti and Ceasefire in the center. In a speech late Tuesday, Junta Chief Assimi Goïta, who had not been seen for 3 days, acknowledged that the situation was of extreme gravity.
Women and men of Mali, my dear compatriots, I am addressing you at this extremely serious moment our country is facing in the wake of the terrorist attacks that took place on April 25, 2026. These complex, coordinated and simultaneous attacks targeted the towns of Bamako, Kati, Kona, Mopti, Gao and Kidal.
On Thursday, a tribute was held under tight security for assassinated Defense Minister Sadio Kamara. Thousands of people, including junta leader Assimi Goïta, dressed in combat fatigues, attended the ceremony at the Military Engineering Battalion grounds in the center of the capital, Bamako. The latest assaults, in which the militants have recaptured the strategic city of Kidal and are continuing their advance in the north, have raised questions about the junta's ability to tackle the security crisis. Despite its insistence that its strategy, foreign partnerships and increased military efforts have stemmed the jihadist threat. Our correspondent, Louisa Olaniyi, sent us this ground report detailing the rebels' offensive and the response by the Malian government and its allies.
Following deadly weekend attack in Mali that killed Defense Minister General Sadio Kamara, the joint anti-jihadist force of Niger, Burkina Faso and Mali have launched intense air campaigns in northern Mali targeting Al-Qaeda-linked JNIM fighters and Tuareg separatists. Niger's government praised the prompt and vigorous response of the unified force after its cabinet meeting on Thursday. Recall that last year, the Alliance of Sahel States formed a 5,000-troop joint force to combat rising jihadist violence through shared intelligence and combined operations. Yet, as the alliance strengthens its military partnership, the JNIM jihadists are calling for a united front to overthrow Mali's junta and impose Sharia. They have now begun a road blockade on the capital Bamako, tightening pressure by restricting fuel, goods and supplies.
Like its military counterparts in neighboring Niger and Burkina Faso, Mali's junta government has severed ties with former colonial ruler France, moving closer politically and militarily to Moscow. Noteworthy is the fact that since 2021, Russia's mercenary Wagner group had fought with Malian forces against jihadists. Last year, the group was replaced by Africa Corps, an organization under the direct control of the Russian Defense Ministry. Though Moscow has pledged its support in the fight against jihadists and separatists, these attacks, reminiscent of a crisis that rocked Mali in 2012, have posed a serious challenge for the ruling junta.
At least 21 people were killed and dozens more were wounded in a bomb attack on a Pan-American highway connecting the cities of Cali and Popayán in the southwestern Colombia on the 25th of April. The Colombian President Gustavo Petro deemed it to be a terror attack and attributed it to a group of cocaine smuggling guerrillas. The bomb attack is one of the deadliest targeting civilians and has come just over a month before the presidential elections that are scheduled for the 31st of May. Though the Latin American nation has enjoyed years of relative calm, left-wing guerrillas, right-wing paramilitaries and murderous drug cartels still maintain dominance over pockets of this embattled nation. There's also been a recent surge in violence which experts say is indicative of the armed groups regaining strength and the ability to carry out coordinated, complex attacks. Our next report tells you more.
The Republic of Colombia was jolted out of its slumber on Saturday by the deadliest bomb attack on its civilians in more than 2 decades. At least 15 women and 5 men were killed when an explosive device was detonated on the motorway connecting the cities of Cali and Popayan in southwestern Colombia. In addition to the Saturday's bomb attack, a series of other attacks in the provinces of Cauca and Valle del Cauca in southwestern Colombia over the weekend brought back the all-too-familiar dread of the 80s and 90s, when cartel attacks, guerrilla violence and political assassinations were commonplace.
We were waiting for them to let us go on, to move forward, and that bomb went off right there. I can't say anything, brother. I'm scared. I just can't say anything. What can you even say in a situation like this? That we're in a country that's finished, that just look at how far this country has fallen. Where else does something like this happen? In what other country does this happen? We're in a bad country.
The incident on the Pan-American Highway resulted in the single biggest loss of life since the now defunct Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, or the FARC, blew up a Bogota nightclub in 2003, killing 36 people. It has fueled fears that violence is on the rise once again, a decade after FARC agreed to disarm after a half a century of conflict with the state.
These attacks were not directed at public security forces. They were against the Colombian state. They were against its people. They were against the farmer, the indigenous person, the woman, and the child who only hoped to enjoy life. This means they threaten the entire population. We must clearly call out the murderers. We must expose them completely. The murderers are the criminals and narco-terrorists belonging to the dissident factions of the cartel of alias Mordisco.
3 days after the deadliest bomb attack on civilians in more than 2 decades, the Colombian police, under Operation Dignity, arrested Jose Alex Vitonco, alias David, the alleged ringleader of a local group of leftist rebels with links to Ivan Mordisco, Colombia's most wanted criminal. Reportedly, a 9mm handgun and 7 cell phones were seized from the suspect by the police in the army-supported operation in the western city of Palmira. According to the police, Vitonco is accused of being the main driver of drug trafficking in southwestern Colombia, with roots to Panama and the United States. On Thursday, community members from Cajibio, southwestern Colombia, carrying white flags and flowers, paid their respects to the 21 victims of Saturday's highway bomb attack.
Please, no more death, no more violence. Human beings like this one, and I know there are many Colombian men and women like her. These kinds of women should die, but die of old age, not have their lives taken from them in such a tragic way.
The major uptick in violence, in which at least 31 guerrilla attacks were recorded in the southwest barely a month before Colombia holds presidential elections, has once again underlined the threat posed by the guerrillas.
And without its wrap on this edition of World at War, if you want to reach out to me with any comments, feedback or suggestions, please feel free to do so on the ID that you're seeing on your screens. I'm your host, Mohammed Saleh, and I'll see you again next week.